So first up on this model is going to be painting the skin, and I was kindly sent some new paints last week, which was the Reaper Master Series. So we're going to be using these throughout at various stages. Now, starting up on the skin for this guy, I went in straight in with the Reaper Master Series Lizard Man Green, which is a really sort of a good sort of base tone for greenskins. I find it's quite a sort of desaturated sort of military type green almost, but I think it works really well for the base color of this skin. Now to this I started adding in cat's eye green, which is a much brighter, more saturated sort of yellowy green to the Lizard Man green, and what it does, it gives us that nice sort of feeling of a little bit of more brightness in the highlights of the skin, whereas with the shadowy areas, as you can see here, I left a lot of the afro shadow showing through and then blended to the afro shadow, so we got these nice sort of desaturated, darker, colourful shadows, and then we move to brighter, more saturated colours for the highlights. And as you can see with this model, I've undercoated the whole model in afro shadow, so everything you're going to see painted on here, apart from a couple of bits of steel, is going to be base coated in the afro shadow, and we're going to work that up. Now, further highlights here were added with using lemon yellow from Reaper Master Series, and right at the end here I used salmon to add a little bit of a pinky tone to the nose and the lips. Now next up on this bad boy is the brown cloth parts, which could be sort of leathery, but I painted them as a brown cloth. And what I've used here is another colour from Reaper, which is Dark Flesh. And this works really nicely over the afro shadow. As you can see here, I can leave the afro shadow showing, and doesn't really need too much blending to really make these two colours work together. The Reaper Master Series colours, they're actually really very nice. They're very sort of smooth, pretty good coverage, and as you can see, the colour is quite nice. Now I also painted the back parts of his armour sections here as like a brown wooded leathery type thing. I'm not really sure what I would really call those, but certainly in the box art they're a sort of browny colour, so I've followed a lot of those colours for this model. Now to this I've added in Gnawed Bone, which is another good colour from Reaper, which is very much more of a sort of a browny, bony sort of colour, which works really nicely, covers great and is really good. And then finally I've added in more of that lemon yellow, which you'll see I'll use quite a lot in this miniature to really put those final highlights on these parts. So now we're tackling the black armour, and there's a sort of couple of sort of bits of armour here that I do slightly different. So the sort of main body of his armour I'm doing in this sort of dulled sort of black look, and over the afro shadow I'm coming in with one of the Reaper colours, which is Black Night Liner, which is more of a translucent colour. I'm not sure whether it's meant to be a wash or what, but it sort of covers fairly nicely, and I found this was pretty good for painting blacks, you know, just as it was. Now what I've done to highlight here, I just add more and more lemon yellow in several different steps, and because we're making this a dull sort of black armour, I'm not pushing the highlights too bright or too small here. I'm trying to leave this showing as more of a sort of black, maybe a black leather or something like that, but we're not pushing it to sort of be like an NMM. So we're on to the other part of the metals here on his main armour, and we're painting those as a sort of dulled steel but we obviously want to paint this a little bit different from the black armor, whereas we want to push the highlights a lot more and a lot smaller to make it look more like an NMM and less like a sort of dull sort of black leather. So for this, we're really using very similar colors to what we used on the black armor before, but we're pushing the highlights a lot further this time by adding ice yellow. And as you can see here, pushing these highlights very small and very bright. So we get a lot of darkness and light in these parts. And as you can see here on the helmet, we're pushing the extreme small highlights all the way to ice yellow, which gives us some really good sort of shine spots to make this part of the armor pop a little bit more. So one of the nicest bits in the box art on this was these red metallic parts that pop up all over the model, and I really wanted to paint these very sort of similar, but not quite the same. I had my own sort of view on how I wanted to do these. Now, over this Afro Shadow base colour, I'm coming in with an AK colour called Sun Red, which is one of their punch colours, but it actually has not got great coverage, so it actually takes quite a few layers to build up to that sort of orangey red colour. I really love the colour, but it's one of those hard ones to work with, where you've just got to keep going with more and more layers until you get to the actual colour. Now, to this Sun Red, I add increasing amounts of lemon yellow, working up to an almost pure lemon yellow finish for the end. And like we did on previous NMMs, we're pushing the bright spots to be as bright as we can to make it appear almost metallic. And we do this by having very small and very bright highlights, certainly on the edges of these parts, and on pieces that we feel that the light is really going to catch and create that little sort of glint that we want. But in the end, I think these come out really nice, and I really love that sun yellow colour underneath. It gives it a really good sort of vibe to these metallic parts. Right, so we're on to all the strapping parts on this model now, and like the box art, we're painting it in a nice red, which I really like having a red strapping like this on gobos and orcs. It looks really cool. And the first layer we're adding on here is burnt red from AK, and I'm painting these so that I'm painting just the straps and leaving the Afro Shadow in between each strap, so that we get a definition line and a definite shadow in between each strap. I then come in with brick red here, which is more of a sort of pinky red, but I think works really nice on this strapping, as I didn't want it to be like a highly saturated gaudy red, but more of that sort of desaturated pinky red that I really like for this type of thing. Because we're going to use different reds later, so these need to be a little bit different. Now, to the brick red, I start adding in small amounts of lemon yellow here, just to add value and a little bit of brightness, and send them more towards that orangey tone. Now, for the tusks, and he's got quite a few actually on his helmet. He's got them on his feet and stuff. We're just painting a sort of traditional sort of bone colour here, and on top of the Afro Shadow base colour, I'm coming in with pure Nord bone, which is this colour from Reaper Master Series that works really well as a bone colour. I mean, it says what it is on the tin, and it works really nicely. Now, I add a little bit of lemon yellow to that, to try and send it more into that sort of yellowy ochre sort of zone. And then the final highlights here, I'll be adding in AK buff, which is my go-to colour for bones and things like that. And as you can see here, I mixed up a glaze, showing you the consistency there on my finger, of pure Afro Shadow here. And the reason I do this is because the initial brush strokes left, you could see them very clearly, they stood out a lot. So coming back with Afro Shadow here in a glaze, and probably took sort of 3 to 5 layers here, and just fades those out into the base of each tusk. Now on top of his head here, he's got this really cool wolf pelt. So this is very simple for me to paint this one. So all I did here was use an Afro Shadow. I took that as my base mix, and I've added in some blue grey, which gives us this sort of very sort of muddy looking brown colour, grey colour, as our base here. And what I'm doing here, I just want to really build up all the little parts of the fur here, painting big clumps at first, and then I add more blue grey in, so that we get almost pure blue grey. And what we do here is, because I want the shadow at the bottom, I paint less and less towards the bottom each time. So my painting actually moves up towards the top of where the helmet meets. That's where it's going to be the brightest. And as you can see here, at the end here, I've gone back in with an Afro Shadow glaze just to smooth those end parts out. So for the strapping on his mace, this was done very simply and quite quickly actually. Similar to the red strapping, except that I've gone straight in with gnawed bone this time. And again, I leave the Afro Shadow showing in between each piece of strapping, so that gives us the shadow and the contrast we need. And to finish this off, I added some pure white into the mix, and just painted some very small lines on the edges and the top facing areas to give us a nice bit of contrast, and to give it that little bit of pop that we need. So for the top of the mace, I wanted to make the metals look a little bit different to what we painted on the armour, as this would be a completely different element, and it's sort of unlikely that it would be made of exactly the same material. So I've tried to paint this more as like a blue steel, and the way I've done this is, on top of Afro Shadow, I've used a colour from Reaper Master series called Shark Bite, which is a really good sort of a bluish greenish sort of colour, more of a sort of teal aqua sort of colour, which works I think really well for this blue steel. And then I just add more and more white into the mix, trying to get up to that really bright small highlight that we want for metallics. And finally I just blend each colour together. Now for the actual mace head itself, I'm trying to sort of emulate the box art here and give it this sort of yellowy, I can't even describe what I think it is. It looks like a sharp rock, but I'm not really sure what it's made of. So I've come in first of all with some burnt red and Sahara yellow mix over top of this Afro Shadow. Now what I'm trying to do is focus the light parts towards the top areas and create these little bright glowing spots of light. Like I said, I'm really not sure what I think this is made of, but I'm trying to push the light into those parts to sort of emulate what it looks like on the box art a little bit. Not quite the same, but I'm deliberately leaving areas of the Afro Shadow here. As you can see, in between that first layer, there is the Afro Shadow, and then I push very, very small highlights further and further up into what I would think is the brighter parts, the bits near the top side of the mace and the little edges and corners that you can see around the object. Now, once I get to a point where I feel like it's going to be bright enough, I'm actually painting, like you see here, just little dots of a very bright colour, which I was adding white at the end here, quite sparingly, but to give that little bright tiny dots of highlight to make it look sort of quite dynamic. And once I'd got this all in place, I actually went back in with a glaze of Afro Shadow just to smooth that first transition into the base colour. So we're on to painting one of my favourite parts of the model, and that is the shield. And what we're doing is, again, over this Afro Shadow base colour, I'm coming in with pure burnt red here and filling in the red section here, and I'm just leaving the tiniest bit of the Afro Shadow showing towards the centre part of the model. So I want the lightest part here to be the outside of this part, because it sort of dips and then sort of slightly comes up towards the outside part. And I've come in with some brick red here to try and, as you can see, I'm only painting towards that outer edge here. And what I want to do is try and push that colour to as bright a point on the outside edge as I can, and this will help emphasise the outside edging where we're going to have this checkerboard pattern. And it leaves the inside edge quite a little bit darker and will allow the brighter parts we're going to paint in the middle stand out more and give us more contrast. Now, once I'd got the brick red down, I start adding in more and more lemon yellow here, trying to build up a higher value to this edge part. Now, as you can see here, it's going very pinky. It's very sort of pink, but I need to push it this way to get the value as high as possible, which is something we do a lot with reds. And I come back in with burnt shadow and brick red here, and then glaze that reddish colour towards the outside, which puts the red tone back in. Now, this is very important with reds, otherwise it just becomes pink. So now we can push it back. As you can see, those parts there are looking more red now than pink. Now at the end here, I come in with Afro Shadow in a glaze and I push the inside bit darker. Now, the last part of this video is going to be the steel on the shield, guys. And this video, I'm going to do this whole paint job in two parts. So this will finish up the first part today, which is all of the gobbo and his shield. And the next part is going to be all doing the wolf, the back banner, and the base. Now, for this shield, I came in first of all with the Black Knight liner, which is a really good colour for putting on as a black base. And then to that I added in lemon yellow and built up all of the highlight places where I want them to be. Now you'll see here that I'm going to push the light, as you can see very clearly here, towards the upper left of the shield. And this is so that we can create some visual interest. We want a bright spot, something that shines more than the others, where we would deem our light, the direction of our light is coming from. So I do this with adding more and more lemon yellow, and then towards the end I start adding in more and more white. As you can see here, we're going very much towards a white, and we then start painting very small areas with this much sort of higher value color. And what this does is this gives us the shine that we're looking for in metallic objects. So you mustn't overdo this stage. Don't paint big areas. It needs to be very small and very bright to give us that metallic look.